I feel like a stranger in my own country. I hear that sentence everywhere in relation to Britain, and I often actually see it in the comments of my YouTube videos. And it's often followed by something even quieter, which is, and I don't think things are going to get better. And that's really the part that should worry us, because Britain, it hasn't collapsed. The lights are still on. The shops are still full, life still functions, and yet it does feel like something has gone missing. The country still works, but it no longer really makes sense to many of the people living inside it. The old assumptions about effort or about fairness or contribution and belonging, they no longer really line up with reality. And you can kind of do everything right in terms of working hard and being responsible, and you still feel like you're permanently behind. This is not just about like prices or housing or wages. All of those are very important, but it's about something much deeper, which is that Britain still has institutions, and the story which explains them no longer works. It doesn't work, doesn't fit onto reality. And so when a country built on story loses confidence in its own narrative, the result is institutional drift, which is extremely unsettling for the average person living there. To understand why this feeling has become so widespread, you really need to understand something very specific about Britain. So Britain was never held together by clear systems or explicit rules in the way that many other European countries were. It didn't rely on clean constitutional design or rationally planned institutions. It really relied on story, on a shared narrative that explained continuity, hierarchy, restraint, and belonging. It was a story that told people how to behave, what to expect, and where they roughly stood, even when circumstances were difficult. For a very long time, that story softened inequality and made decline intelligible, like it gave people a way to interpret hardship without feeling that the country itself had lost coherence. What's happening now isn't just economic strain or political dysfunction. It's the quiet failure of that story to explain the reality people are living today. One reason this confusion runs so deep in Britain is that the old story, it didn't just simply fade away. It outlived its material foundation. So people really tend to forget that up until very recently, Britain was not just a functioning nation state. It was the dominant global power, an imperial center, a country whose institutions, language, and economic influence shaped large parts of the world. And this is not like centuries ago. That period actually ended within living memory, and yet the psychological residue of it still hasn't fully left. Britain did not experience defeat in the way that many other continental powers did. Like, there was no constitutional reset or moment where the country was forced to publicly redefine itself. Instead, decline arrived slowly and ambiguously, disguised as kind of like a form of continuity. But Britain is no longer that country, and crucially, it never replaced that story that went with it. So instead, the remnants of imperial confidence continue to sit on top of an economy that has fundamentally changed. What's frustrating to me is that nobody's talking about this. Like, if you look at the very popular explanations and possible solutions currently up for political debate, immigration is, of course, at the top of the list. But Britain's problem is not immigration. Like, that explanation is very convenient, but it's wrong, because immigration has become the story Britain tells itself because it is visible. It's emotionally charged and it's politically extremely useful, but it does not explain why the country feels poorer and angrier and more disoriented than it did even in objectively harsher decades. Britain was economically worse off in the 1970s. Like, there were literal power cuts, energy was being rationed, inflation was brutal, and the industry was collapsing. And yet somehow, as far as I can tell, the country felt more coherent then than it does today. So what has actually collapsed is economic meaning. For most of the 20th century, Britain's national identity rested on a simple moral logic. Work hard, contribute, behave properly, wait your turn, and the system will eventually recognize you. That logic did not depend on equality, like Britain has never been equal, but it depended on a different economy, which is not present in today's reality. Productivity has flatlined, wages have stagnated, housing is detached completely from wages, And ownership is increasingly inherited, not earned. It's one thing to talk about growth and stagnation, but it's another to think about the lost connection between effort and security, meaning working hard does not translate into financial security or economic stability unless you work in finance or tech. Like, those are pretty much the only two areas of growth right now, and that is fatal to any social contract. Immigration can add a destabilizing social component to an already struggling society, but reducing immigration does not automatically raise living standards. That only happens when productivity rises, when housing supply expands, when capital investment increases and institutions regain credibility. And Britain has done none of these at scale. This is why the old institutions no longer hold, they're no longer fulfilling the narrative or the story that supposedly is correct. So, for example, the BBC, it's still broadcast, it's still there, but fewer people recognize themselves in it, fewer people are watching the BBC, and it is currently going through a credibility crisis, so we'll see how that turns out. Universities are still there, they still have very good reputations, but they no longer reliably deliver mobility, because when everyone has a degree, it cheapens the value of them. The monarchy still exists, it's still there, but they are really struggling to fit into the national story right now. Like recently, it's been celebrity gossip or moral scandal. There hasn't been much depth to symbolize continuity. So these institutions, they are still there. Operationally, it might look like nothing has changed, but they have failed narratively. They no longer explain Britain to itself in a way that matches lived reality. Immigration becomes emotionally charged when meaning collapses. So when housing is scarce, competition feels moral. When wages stagnate, fairness feels violated. And when institutions lose legitimacy, belonging really starts to feel negotiable. And so immigration absorbs these pressures because it sits at the intersection of scarcity, fairness, and identity. That is why immigration debates intensify even when numbers fall. So this has been a talking point for so long that it has embedded itself emotionally into the national story, which means that when the numbers fall, which they will do over the next few years, there's going to be less people coming in, and material conditions still don't improve, people will get more emotional because they are not tracking the actual problem. They are tracking the symptoms, like the feelings of frustration and disorientation, but not the actual cause. This is also not a culture war problem, it's an economic one. So cultural conflict explodes only after economic confidence collapses. So when life is improving, society tolerates ambiguity. When it isn't, identity hardens. Blaming culture or immigration reverses the causal chain. So the real sequence is economic stagnation leads to institutional distrust, which leads to identity conflict. It's not the other way around. Britain used to derive meaning from making things, from actually producing stuff and exporting power and raising living standards. That story, as evidenced by reality, has now ended and no replacement has been built. So until the economy works again, no amount of border control or moralizing or procedural politics will restore coherence. Britain needs an economic plan, a vision that looks to the future and not to the past. You cannot police your way out of a meaning collapse, and the longer Britain insists otherwise, the more politics will remain bitter, symbolic and unresolved, regardless of who comes, who stays, or who is blamed next. Thank you so much for watching. I'm interested to hear your take on this. Let me know in the comments below. If you found this video interesting, feel free to check out this one here next. Thank you. Take care. Bye.